This week on the Just Some Musings podcast, I'm excited to say that we have a special guest. His name is Jason Yee, and he's made quite a reputation in being an expert in a lot of the changes and the inner machinations of the Canadian pension plan.
Yeah, not to be confused with Justin Lee, although we found out you have a lot of similarities, such as your background in the oil industry and in engineering. This episode in particular, I want to recommend anyone who happens to be listening to this on their podcast player right now. If you're on Spotify, you can see the video on the app itself, or you can check out this episode on YouTube. The website to the blog post and video for this episode will be muhs.ca/JSM307. And the reason I'm recommending watching this one instead of just listening to it is because Jason will bring up a couple of neat infographics and a slide rule type of tool that he has on his website. And we'll be going over some of that in this episode. But anyways, this will be a really infotaining one on the Canada Pension Plan.
So I left Fort McMurray when Suncor and Petro merged, so that would have been the end of 2009. Right. And then I came down to Calgary. So I've been in Calgary since. So it's been, holy cow, it's been 15 years now.
It's been a long time, yeah. We both lived there for just under 5 years. Mm-hmm. We stayed in, I think you had a place, was it Penhorwood? We stayed there for a while.
Infamous Penhorwood.
Down in the waterworks, yeah.
That's been a topic of conversation a year or two ago, on this very podcast.
Oh, has it? Has it come up?
Talking about condos and things of that nature, yeah. So it's a long, sordid history.
I bet you could help people avoid more than one landmine in that regard.
Unfortunately, it's through the lessons learned. But I'm being a bad Oilers fan. I had my jersey and I thought about wearing it today, but I needed to switch up the mojo, right? So I'm gonna wear it at home, but I'm not at the office today.
Well, one unfortunate thing is this isn't going to be published till July, and so whoever watches this already, I'll mention this is recorded June 17th. Right before Game 6. So who knows how tonight will turn out? We could be out of it after tonight, or maybe we'll be Stanley Cup champions. I don't know.
You know what? It'll be done this week, and my emotional that roller coaster is at least I'll be very moody maybe for a little while, depending on the result, or maybe I'll be elated. But I know that it's soon coming to an end.
So anyways, we just heard a little bit from Justin and Jason, and I didn't actually know that the two of you knew each other. What I knew about each of you is you both were engineers at some point and worked in Fort McMurray. And then, I've known Justin for a few years here at Canaccord, and I got to meet Jason at the IFP symposium last fall. And so I had no idea you two knew each other.
The funny thing is, all you would need to do is change a couple of letters in our names, and then
Justin, Jason, Lee, Yee.
But it is interesting. It is interesting to see how past experiences are cumulative, and they kind of build onto things. And the engineering background, in our world, it's there. It's not as common as like a BCom or what have you, but it's that analytical toolkit, I think, really helps out, especially when we start talking about some of the things that Jason is an expert on in terms of numbers and CPP and years and what have you, right? So I'm looking forward to hearing and learning more about a CPP and some of the new additions to the CPP plan.
Cool. See, with the kind of work that I do, I honestly feel more like an engineer, because I feel like I'm solving problems. Yeah. They're just financial in nature, and I mean. Going back,
I think, is it fair to say that on the topic of CPP, you really nerd out on that one topic?
I do, absolutely.
You took CPP and you just learned absolutely everything there is to know about it.
It's 100% of my focus right now, definitely. And honestly, it was sort of that engineer's curiosity that got me interested in the CPP in the first place. I like when I don't know. I guess I'll maybe rewind the tape a little bit. Was doing financial planning work. Sort of behind the scenes financial plans, and someone's CPP income is an input to the financial plan. It's one of the numbers you need to do projections and figure things out. And what I realized right away were two things got my attention. Number one, that input, the people use, is very often wrong. And so I think most people will get the estimates from Service Canada, which is a really good starting point. You need the contribution history to calculate, to produce an estimate, and they give you that. But those estimates, inherently are based on a few simple assumptions, and they can be really, really wrong. That means it's the whole garbage in, garbage out thing. So if you put a bad number in for someone's CPP, you do a whole bunch of financial planning, thinking they're going to get this, whether it's less or more than real, those financial planning conclusions or recommendations can be way off. And so that got my attention. And so I wanted to know how to calculate things, and could I produce a more accurate estimate? So that was the first thing. But the second thing too is just, when it comes to one of the CPP options, the start date, where you can change how much you receive, seeing the impact on that on financial plans really got my attention.
Massive.
Because when you delay and you increase the amount of guaranteed inflation protected income that someone gets, for a reasonable planning period. We can get into the whole longevity thing, dies early, and all those debates all you want, but for financial planning, delaying, just the impact, it really surprised me. And so I wanted to know more about that. And then that led me to, that decision making and the information that's out there about those options and decision making. That's when I realized, the information that's out there, some of it I just think is just flat out wrong. But even stuff that's not flat out wrong, it could be presented a little bit better, because research has shown us that not a lot of people are taking advantage of that option. And so those are really the two
deferring it, right?
That got my curiosity going, and what made me sort of focus in on it, learn it, understand it. How can I get better, more accurate estimates? And then how can I help people with the options that they have, make those decisions for whatever their situation is. Now, I've spent a lot of time on the benefits of delaying. That does not mean I think everyone should delay. I think people should start as a default from a position of delay, crunch the numbers, look at what that means, and then apply your personal situation to that, make that adjustment. But start with good objective numbers in the first place.
I think the biggest problem is too many people, they see the default as starting at 60, instead of, seeing it as 65. And, one thing I brought up, I wrote a blog post about this years ago about the delaying, taking it later, earlier. The vast majority of Canadians don't have defined benefit pension plans, for one. Yeah. So they see an advantage to delaying, because they get that, like you said, inflation adjusted guaranteed income for life. But also a lot of people don't really take into account proper life expectancies as well. There's maybe a bit too pessimism around that. I'm not going to live till 80, but the odds are you will.
Right.
And I think a much greater risk to you in your retirement is living too long and running out of money, as opposed to dying too early. Again, unlikely, but possible. And then not leaving as much to your inheritors or whatever. That's less of a worry. I think it should be less of a worry, but a lot of wrong assumptions.
Both can, longevity is a two-sided coin, right? There's the dying early and there's the living a long time, and they're both risks in a way, and they're both handled when you do financial planning in different ways. And CPP is really good for handling one of those risks. If someone, and I think plans and people need to account for both of them. And so it's using the right tool for the job, to protect, for that longevity risk, and and the other pieces that CPP is good for. CPP is the right tool. So making decisions to use that tool properly is one thing. Because if someone legitimately has, a concern about dies early and they want to do some financial stuff, there's other things that can be done, besides taking CPP early to achieve those goals. But people look at CPP and the CPP decisions as very black and white, without sort of that broader holistic context. And that's one of the other things that I wish wasn't as prevalent in the way people looked at it.
Well, that deferral choice is probably the one that I see coming up the most with clients, especially like going into retirement. And that's one I've always I've gotten to know the math on it really well. When I started my career, it was simply 0.5% per month if you start before your 65th birthday, 0.5% bonus if you start after your 65th birthday. And then they changed that along the way, roughly 2012-ish or so. And I think it was implemented in 2016 fully, that when you start your CPP before 65, you're penalized 0.6% per month before your 65th birthday, and then bonus 0.7% per month after your 65th birthday. Really, the government of the time was trying to make more of an incentive to start it later, right? Yep. But when you look at the dollar numbers, the difference between starting at 60 and 70, it's basically double. You're getting almost more than double, I think, double your income from 70 onward versus half that much from 60 onward, which again brings you to roughly 80-ish, which is your break-even point. And the fact is, most of us, if we're healthy in our 60s, we do live past that. That's what people don't really kind of realize.
The more someone is going to receive CPP from the enhanced part two, that amount, the benefit to delaying only gets bigger. So it's going to be more than double for people that are, call it going into the workforce now. So with, closer to the full 40 years of the enhancement. So the numbers, they get big. They get big in a hurry, and they're quite impressive. Yeah.
I think of it as sort of like that. It's like that marshmallow test, right? But not for little kids, but for adults. And so there's something, and I've heard a few people say to me that, well, I know that I can get this now. Like, why don't I just start getting it, right? And it's like bird in the hand, two in the bush, right? And maybe they don't have as much other savings to complement and help delay that decision making to start CPP. But broadly, I don't know off the top of your head if you have any some sort of kind of rule of thumb, or not rule of thumb, but like numbers. But broadly speaking, for someone who is working, call a regular career, but a full career, 30, 40 years or so now in Canada, it makes sense to delay it and not take it early, and just, as you said, maybe the paradigm shift is to not think about 60, but it's 70 or 71, right? That should be kind of like the starting point, and that's what you're trying to impart on other people. Is it safe to say?
I think so now. I mean, I think, there's a lot of new research, and I'm going to mention National Institute of Aging and a lot of their research. It's the most comprehensive, the most recent research in this area, and they're trying to reset that people's reframe what people think of as the default, and they really want people to think of as the default as age 70, go straight to age 70, do everything from that reference point right off the hop, and then it's like, you can take it earlier, but you're going to get less, and then even getting rid of 65 as the main reference point. And so I think that's a really good idea. Mm-hmm. There are a lot. And so you're right, Justin. Most people, if they have, there's a lot of reasons that people could take early. And so if they have a lot of guaranteed income already, so they don't necessarily need it or want it, DB pensions, people with DB pensions, that's a reason right there. Mm-hmm. Legitimate, gonna live, early life expectancy, reasons. A lot of people will have something that they're anchored to, or a frame from something recent. Uncle so and so died at 70, or delayed till 70 and died at 71, and things like that. That one's a little tougher, right? You're getting into family history, but how much does family history play into those sorts of things? There's lots of research that suggests other things sort of dominate. A good sort of metric or test for that, if you've got a life insurance policy and you were rated, you got a legit case for dies early when doing your CPP analysis. But in the absence of that, using actuarial tables, at least as a starting point, get the numbers for the starting point and know what you're missing out on, and then start overlaying those additional things. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of really good legitimate reasons, because CPP income is taxed as regular income if they're the net of everything that they would get could be technically lower from delaying CPP. They may,
they're retired at 60. They might as well stretch that income out over more years.
Yeah, GIS comes up a lot for a lot of people. Yeah.
So I've also found a lot of the clients I see here in Edmonton are government workers with defined benefit pension plans. So they've already got that. That's their main retirement income, is the defined benefit plan.
Yeah.
And, those cases, maybe it doesn't make more sense, but it doesn't hurt them as much. Yeah. Now I see where you guys probably, I think, Jason, you specialize a lot in engineers, maybe in the oil field industry too. And I know when we met in Ottawa at the Rash Reminder meetup, I talked to one of your clients there who was, I think, with Amazon, right? So those type of people probably don't have defined benefit plans and probably benefit more so from that later start.
Yeah, you're right. A lot of
I don't.
current employees, just simply don't have a defined benefit plan. Lots do, and so one of the metrics I like to do then is looking at coverage ratios. Look at all your guaranteed sources, whether it's OAS, DPP, defined benefit, or annuities. If the plan is to purchase annuities, it's another thing. And so how much of your needs will be covered by guaranteed sources, and then how much of your discretionary, and then so add those two up together, how much of your total plan spendable is covered by guaranteed sources, and how much of that do you want? Because again, there's a lot of research that shows older people, and now we're starting to see the same people being surveyed multiple times in retirement. They really appreciate that guarantee. It causes, it relieves a lot of anxiety. It relieves a lot of stress. Knowing that people that have that guaranteed income allows people to spend more and enjoy their retirement, whether it's on the early side or they're going to get more in the later or what have you. The research is starting to show that they're able to enjoy life more because they don't have the anxiety of whether it's outliving money or where's the money going to come from. So there's a lot of non-financial reasons that,
for sure,
the good financial reasons get overlooked a lot, or there's a lot of misconception. And so the non-financial reasons are even on people's radars. Again, because a lot of the research that really supports these sorts of things and the surveys, they're new, right? They're new. There's a lot of people out there that have, anecdotally observed these sorts of things for a long time. And, now they're actively trying to change and improve the messaging, the communication, and how people look at CPP options and making better decisions. So, we're moving in the right direction. But there's just, there's still so much further to go, honestly.
You just said the word misconception, and I'm curious, broadly speaking, what would be one of the largest misconceptions? Because you said you deal with people who, if it's predominantly engineers or technical people, or they know some information. But what is a broad misconception that the general clients that you've been working with have about CPP?
About CPP, we've already touched on the main one. The main one is that whole longevity piece. And I start from that FP Canada projection assumption guidelines. I use that, and I do lifetime CPP calculations. I use that as a starting point. And I always do an optimistic case and a dies early case as well. So that's one of the main ones. I'd say people don't realize, again, everything about CPP seems really binary. People either think they're going to retire on my CPP and then they're shocked when it's not that much, or they realize that they're not going to get that much, and so they totally discount everything about CPP, including even just having a little bit of inflation protected guaranteed income for the rest of your life. So that's another major one too, is just what to expect.
It's not going to survive.
What can
that's what I see. That's what I see the most is people just think it's not going to be around. Like, oh, the baby boomers will use up all the money, but no, it's a lot of money. What is it now? $600 billion or $700 billion in the fund? I know there's some dispute about has the performance been that great in the last year or two, but it's still there. It's funded. It's not like Social Security in the US or.
I break it up into two components. So there's national concerns, and then there's the concerns of the individual. A lot of people don't think CPP should even exist in the first place, right? But I do believe there's a good case for it. When you look at the retirement income system, the government has some programs to provide a base minimum level support. Keep people out of poverty.
Exactly.
That's really the goal out of that one. Second pillar, employer sponsored programs, and employers do have a responsibility, and our policy is constructed in a way that employers have some responsibility to provide for their employers, and that's encouraged, and there's tax benefits and all that. And then there's your own personal savings, pillar number 3.
Yeah.
And really those things are all meant to sort of work together. And a lot of people their criticisms about CPP, I think, are the misconception, because they look at CPP as a standalone thing and they don't realize there is some thought behind this entire system and how it's supposed to work.
It's a big picture thing.
They just don't look at it that way, or they look at it as, something forced on me. So there is national level concerns, and people that just say screw CPP, I don't think that should be done. I got my own personal issues with some of the things with CPP, and they're personal. I don't really share them, but given that the CPP exists, given that these are the rules, these how the calculations work, here's all your options. Whether I like CPP or I don't, or there's parts of it that I don't like and think should be better, that doesn't matter to me. My job is, given the CPP exists, I'm going to, take your information, crunch all the numbers, and I'm going to, help you make the best decision for you. And I think a lot of people, because they have an issue with CPP as a national level program, they completely ignore getting the best for themselves, their personal level concerns, out of the CPP program. I do break things up, into those two distinct things, because you can handle CPP issues from sort of both those angles.
I personally used to be of the mindset that with what's going into CPP, the amount of my paycheck going in, if I took that money and saved it in my own RSP, I'd do better. And that may or may not be the case, but yeah, totally. Having seen a wide variety of the Canadian public when I worked at a bank many years ago, I can see a lot of people would be destitute if there were no CPP.
Yeah.
And at the same time, the other thing too, I see, like you said, on the other side of things, I often see these posts on Facebook, usually people who are seniors who complain about, the CPP hardly covers any of my expenses. Why isn't that going up? Or why does this other group get some kind of other benefit from the government, whereas my CPP is only $1,200 or $1,300 a month or whatever? And, there too, you have to realize it's not meant to be your full pension. It's meant to cover, and we'll go over this in a little bit here now with the enhancement. Traditionally, it was meant to cover 25% of a industrial wage. That industrial wage thing, it's kind of getting into some of the definitions now. YMPE. Do you want to tackle that one, Jason?
Year's maximum pensionable earnings. So history lesson here. So yeah, they're having a mandatory program, but they wanted to be sensitive to there was a lot of issue over that a lot of debate over that initial contribution rate. And the government really didn't want to be forcefully taking a lot of money from people, so they really. In the original contribution rate, there was tiny. Some people wanted it more. Wanted it to cover more, and there was a lot of controversy over that initially, but you're absolutely right. The amount of earnings, and again, they didn't want that unlimited. It was based on what they thought the average Canadian. You'd mentioned industrial wage. Another way to look at it is it's meant to represent the average wage of Canadians broadly, and so that's what the YMPE is meant to represent. But
someone making a lot of money doesn't really contribute that much more into CPP and get that much more of a benefit. I mean, yes, it might be beneficial to the plan if someone making $200K a year was contributing 5% of that. But then, down the road, if someone's getting $5,000 a month from CPP, then someone's going to complain, right?
Right.
So they set that cap.
Part of it, it's like, what does the typical Canadian look like? And then, so how do we design the system around sort of like those medians, those averages? And so the program was designed with an earnings threshold. Once you earn at that threshold, you no longer have to contribute into CPP on any earnings beyond that. And so there's a sort of like this annual maximum is a simple way of looking at it. And so you can think of every individual calendar year as the chance to earn one pension credit is a simple way of looking at it. And so once you've reached that YMPE, that earnings threshold, you've earned one full credit for that year. And then how your benefit's determined is, looking at all the credits throughout your working life. CPP jargon, they call that your contributory period. In human talk, your working life. How many of those pension credits have you accumulated, and what does that translate, into as a benefit down the line?
Yeah. So the basic math of it all was, and this is traditionally before we had the enhanced CPP, the basic math was basically if you earned at the YMPE or higher for 40 years, you pretty much then qualify for 100% CPP at 65. then it gets really dicey. And maybe instead of going too much into this, Jason, we'll refer people to your website because you have some really good sort of animated videos, I guess, kind of explaining if you're making less, you're getting less of those pension credits, as you refer to them as well. How does the dropout provision apply to that? If people, take some time off to raise kids, or you're dropping out your lowest income earning years, that's where it gets a lot more complicated. I don't know how much you want to get into that now, or if you want to just sort of refer people to your website for more.
I can run through the basics of the calculation. So here's the CPP retirement pension calculation. It's basically 4 steps plus 1 final adjustment. So this is the simplest way you can kind of look at it without getting into a bunch of crazy numbers. The 4 steps are inflation protection. So you earn money throughout your life. At the beginning, when you're starting out, age 18, in your 20s, you probably weren't making as much as you are now. So the very first step is to inflation protect, all your contributions. Step number 2 is any special adjustments that you're eligible for. And so those are the dropouts. And so basically, the CPP works by requiring that you make contributions for a certain amount of time to get the maximum. Mm-hmm. But the CPP also recognizes, hey, people might have interruptions throughout their working life, whether it's
life.
Raising, it's life. Yeah, it's life. It's raising children. You might get laid off. Hey, I was in that boat, maybe twice. Mm-hmm. I've gone through that. And so there's provisions that give you forgiveness for time where you're not contributing into CPP and earning pension credits. And so everyone is allowed to drop out for the base CPP, the original program, 17% of their lowest years. There's also dropouts for child raising and disability. Once you've made those adjustments, you just calculate your average of your earnings over your lifetime after those adjustments have been made. So to give you that forgiveness. And so the purpose of those adjustments is to try to boost your lifetime average earnings. Then what you brought up, Marcus, that earnings replacement rate, how much of your lifetime average earnings is CPP designed to replace for you? Mm-hmm. And that original program, that number is 25%. And that's your enhancement. And that's your earnings replacement rate. So once you multiply your lifetime average earnings by your earnings replacement rate, you get what's called your basic pension amount. Then you've got your hand on the dial, and you can basically adjust. You can crank. If you start early, that basic amount's going to decrease, and if you start later, that basic amount's going to increase. And so that's where the age adjustment, that the option that you have that'll make the most impact. Now,
enhanced CPP.
The enhanced CPP makes things a little more complicated.
This is the engineer process flow diagram coming out. Yeah.
Yeah. And let's just back up a little bit and explain the why. So what happened in the intervening years is the Trudeau government, I guess, listened to Canadians in this case, that people were not too enthusiastic about how much they were getting for CPP. Younger generations having a harder time to save as well. So they kind of thought, let's enhance CPP a bit so that we're not just doing 25% of X amount as income replacement retirement, but the plan is to move up that X and increase that to 33%. And then this was all phased in over a number of years, making things super, super complicated for us. But that was kind of the gist of it. Not really. And again, some people think that this is addressing existing retirees. No, they get nothing from this. It's younger people, and mostly even younger than us, who are getting the most benefit from additional amounts, higher contribution rates, which one party calls the higher payroll tax. Not to get too much into politics here, but there's good and bad for both sides. But forced savings. It is forced savings. We got more forced savings, and in the end, people who today are just entering the workforce are going to have a higher income from CPP when they retire.
That's a great summary.
And you're Jason will explain all the machinations.
We went from this to this. Now this looks big and scary, right? All those extra boxes, but what you'll notice is those 4 steps are the same.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned that, they made things more complicated for us. I like to say the numbers change and do different things, but the general idea is the same. These 4 steps are identical. You're going through those same basic steps. It's just the details for each of them are a little bit different. There's no general dropout, for example, for the additional CPP. They're just going to take your best 40 years, period. So, the effect for the most part comes out the same, except in special cases. So, like, it's funny when I jump from, this picture to this picture, it looks big and scary, but the 4 steps plus the adjustment, they're the same.
Yeah.
So conceptually, the same thing's going on. There's just some little tweaks, some little differences. Why is this 8.33? Why is this the 33 that you mentioned? The first additional CPP requires contributions on the same amount of earnings as the base, as the original, up to that original earnings threshold. So you add 25, you add the 8.33 to 25, you get the 33. And so this is how, on the same level of earnings, they get you from 25 to 33. It's the first additional accounts for that difference at 8.33. And that's why for the second additional, you see they go straight to that 33%. It's because it's only on your earnings between that original threshold, the YMPE, and now there's a new higher earnings threshold called the year's additional maximum pensionable earnings. The differences are enough that you can't, the rules of thumb, if there were generalizations, if there were any before, they're completely out the window now. Because your lifetime average earnings technically can be different between, the base and the first additional, even though they're on the same level of earnings, depending on how, some of the details in these little steps happen. So what that means for people like me is I need to calculate the base, the first and the second individually, add those up to get a total, and then, the adjustment that you make based on your age is made to that total, so don't let, all those extra boxes sort of scare you. For the most part, those 4 basic steps are doing the same thing. It's just little tweaks to the numbers, and those are the kinds of things that the calculators are going to do in the background, or I do in the background. When I do the calculations, I like to see all those individual components because then I can explain things to people. I can answer their questions. I can, this much is related to, this, that, and the other thing. Because sometimes they can do something about it with the time that they have left if they're still planning on working.
Yep. So someone who's just now entering the workforce, now that we've fully implemented the enhancement, for them it gets a little bit easier, right? Then you're not having to calculate those 3 things. You're just basically from this.
You still have to do the calculations individually. Yeah,
you're still doing that. Okay, right? Because there's the dropout provision for the base, but not the enhance.
Yeah.
Okay. So really, it's like the government just wants to make it. You have to rely on the information they give you, right? Or they want people to rely more on that information. And towards the end of this, I'll go over the My Service Canada portal to kind of show where you can get some of your personal information.
Okay,
and
that's
then,
good idea.
And then, so on your website, you have a really cool slide rule. And I say really cool. It takes me a while to wrap my head around it to figure it out for myself. And actually, I did a video recently for my newsletter going over some of those basics about CPP. And I reached out to you, Jason, originally about maybe including that in the video, but then I thought I can't do this justice. Let's go to the horse's mouth and get him to explain how this thing works.
Sure.
And you have an entire video series on how to use it.
I do. I do. And it's broken up into little chunks. So I try to put it in bite-sized pieces for people. Because, a lot of the stuff in here is not going to be relevant to everyone. So for those of you who wanted to know everything about a CPP slide rule, I like this because this packs a lot of information in a single image. It shows a lot of historic information. Like you had said, how this works. Okay, so there's a timeline. 1966 is when CPP started, and there's a timeline, so it goes out to 2100. And so to get your own personal information, I don't know, pick an age or how old.
Let's say
you want to put this out there, Marcus? How old are you? What year were you born?
Yeah, I turned 18 in 1999, I guess.
99? Okay.
Yep. I think Justin's a few months older than me, so we'd be pretty close for both of us there.
Party like it's 1990. Yeah. This reminds me of those things you measure your foot with back at the department store or the shoe store.
Oh, geez,
yeah, one of those things.
I remember those. How do they do that now? Do they just take a laser image of it?
No, it's just a newer version.
Most of us buy our shoes online and we just send them back when they don't fit.
It's 3D printed and it's like a fiberglass probably.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry. Mm-hmm. So okay, well, hey, you mentioned something. So this has a lot of historic information. So people that were say wanted to retire who were in the 60s, so their ages are here. Back in you'd mentioned when the drop, not the drop, what's the age adjustments used to be 0.5. So I show all that historic information here. So let's say someone was, turned age 65 in 2011. For them, it was the 0.5 reduction before, if they would have started CPP before age 65. But for them,
so you've integrated that as well into this chart. That's good.
Yeah, it's all this historic information. So general dropout percentages were different back then. Like back then, this person would have only been able to drop out 15% rather than 17%. So I sort of have all this sort of historic information that's not relevant to people now. This really only would have applied to people that started back then. But every now and then, I'm asked to sort of check, hey, is what I'm receiving from CPP correct? And so every now and then I'll have to, look at things sort of, how they were in the past. But I like to toggle that off because usually it's just clutter and not relevant. But you said you turned 18 in what, 1999?
1999.
Yeah. And so how this works. So what this shows is, you're going to be age 60 in 2041, 65, 2046. So to see how much the enhanced you're going to be able to participate in, it's how many of those, that 40-year transition period are you going to be able to participate in. So let's say you're looking at starting CPP at just picking age 65.
65, yeah.
I'm going to turn on this cursor, go out to age 65. The first part of the enhancement started in 2019, and this gray shaded area represents, the size is scaled to represent 40 years. What this means is you would have had the chance to contribute 27 out of the 40 years into the first additional CPP, so the first part of the enhancement. So you can sort of see that. You could.
So yeah, I see the enhancement starts there.
What proportion from here, from the left edge to where I put the cursor? What proportion of the total gray shaded area, is between sort of 2019 and where the cursor is, and that's 27 out of 4 years. For the second CPP, it actually started five years later. So you're not going to have, if you start CPP at age 65, you're not going to have as many years potentially contributing to the second additional CPP. So this time only
22 years of enhancement
40 rather than 27 out of 40. Now, when you want to translate that to that earnings replacement rate, this 5.6 that you can read up in this box, that's what you're expecting to get from the first additional CPP. 5.6% of the total 8.33 that is available had you been able to contribute for a full 40 years. And so for the second additional CPP, that's for someone of your age, the most you could expect out of that is, replacing 18% of your earnings rather than the full 33 and a third. For any earnings that would be above the YMPE and below the YAMPE. So this is sort of a way to visualize, how much of that new higher earnings replacement rate they're effectively going to get or could get if they make those full contributions. And so that's sort of what, how this is supposed to work. And also being able to read off all the individual variables that go into the calculations. Like these are little factors that were used to transition how the first additional CPP worked. They didn't want to go full bore all at once. So they eased into it. So the contribution rate for the first additionals scaled in progressively over 5 years. So for the first additional CPP, it's an additional 1% contribution rate. So for the first year, rather than going straight to that, that hit on people's, the contribution that, from their income, rather than charging a full 1%, the first year they did 0.15, and the next year 0.3, and then 0.5. So they scaled up, to the full value. And for the second additional CPP, they did that over 2 years rather than 5 for the first. And so it's just a way to ease into the new program. And so that slide rule has, a whole bunch of that information, that I use for the calculations. And it provides those visuals.
It's a lot of information on that tool. I can see how you're trying to layer it. It sounds like that now that at least it's been fully implemented now, although depending on the age, it'll impact you differently. There's still going to be a need to have some in-depth multi-level, stage 1, level 1, level 2, level 3, if I can use those terms, calculations on a go forward, irrespective of age and irrespective of income. The enhanced CPP has been around now for less than a decade. How has feedback been on it? There's people who are complaining, as Marcus alluded to, it's more a payroll tax, or no, it's helping me save more. Are there more potential adjustments to come in the future? Or can we assume that this is going to be status quo for the time being, for an indefinite period of time, and that nobody's really going to try to or want to make some adjustments for a while yet?
I mean, it's clearly more complicated.
Yeah.
And, pretty much everyone that I talk to, whether they be professionals that deal with CVP stuff or the general public, they clearly made things more complicated. I can speculate why. That whole phase-in period and splitting things up like that, really makes doing those calculations a mess. If you think of it as those 4 steps, conceptually it's really straightforward, but just a lot of little details to pay attention to. The major warning I have about that is, there used to be all these sort of generalizations, rules of thumbs and things before. Yeah. They're completely out the window now. Okay. Because, people used to say, I want to start at age 60 because often you're asked adding those 0 years. So some people want to delay, but they don't want to add those 0 years because they're not working. So they've came out of the workforce. That's another. Okay, let's talk about this one, actually. A lot of people associate retirement and starting CPP as the same thing, and they're equal. Stopping work is one thing. Starting CPP is a completely different thing.
I was going to say that's a whole other complication to the thing, and that was also phased in, I think, probably 2009, 2010, around back then, right? Well, you can start your CPP and still contribute to it.
The post-retirement benefit.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I'm not sure what year. Yeah, it was probably around that, 2009.
I just remember when I did my CFP exam in 2009, it was all really easy back then. Then they made things more and more complicated.
I can't imagine what it is now. Yeah. So a lot of people will have stopped working because that's what they want to do. Even before turning age 60. Age 60 comes, and because they're not contributing, they're going to have a 0 earning year. And so they'll say, "Oh, I don't have dropout room. That I'm losing. My lifetime average earnings is coming down. My personal slice of the total CPP pie by adding those 0 years is decreasing." Yes, for the base CPP, but your contributions, everyone has 40 0 years right now, and you're adding to them on a going forward basis. So you're going to get something out of the enhanced CPP now.
So you're not bringing the average down. You're just, if you're not at the 40 yet, right? You're not.
See, that's one of the calculation differences. When I do this, getting geeky. The denominator is 480. It's 480 months.
Yeah.
That's how it is, though. Like, I know that there's a maximum. Basically, everyone's starting with 40 0 years. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They're just filling each of those 40 buckets.
Filling each of those, that's the other thing I got, that ice cube tray analogy. Yeah, so basically for the enhanced, everyone's got an empty ice cube tray and you're filling it up going forward. But you probably have a full ice cube tray, or more of your ice cube tray has something in it for the past. We probably jumped ahead to stuff that listeners that aren't familiar with all those videos haven't seen.
Let me actually just share something here real quick on my screen, just how someone can find out more information. I already alluded to the My Service Canada. So
yeah,
a lot of people are familiar with MyCRA nowadays, especially lately with their TFSA follies.
Yeah,
but no, they're good. They're back again, and they're pretty accurate. But nowadays, when we file our taxes, we go there anyways to see our notice of assessment. We don't get that little piece of paper in the mail anymore. But there's also My Service Canada, and works the exact same way to log in. Very secure, using an Interact sign-in partner. You're basically logging in with your online banking. Once you're in there, it gives you a lot of information. I think there was like things about the Canadian dental plan in there. but I skipped right to the CPP earnings and contributions. And so what you want to look at is what were your, it'll give you an estimate, but again, as Jason mentioned, it might not be that relevant for people still with many years in the workforce. But if you want to find out how have your buckets or your ice cube trays filled up so far, this is where you can find it. And I don't mind sharing my own here because this doesn't share my personal income really. It just basically shares maximum contributions for these years. And you kind of see in these columns here, I have several columns. One is for the base amount that we talked about, and then there's the yearly additional amounts. Here we have so far first additional portions for me for these years, as Jason mentioned, 2019 to 2024. So I'm supposing then for 2025 onward, I'm going to fill in this other column, right, Jason?
For 2024, technically, and so this is something that I've noticed because I've been doing estimates for clients who obviously have second additional contributions for 2024. That information is not currently showing up in these.
There should be something in this column. Maybe they just haven't.
There should be something there, and it hasn't flowed through yet. And so it's something where it's funny. I just did one the other day, and I just put in the appropriate number because I knew the client's income. So the most that second additional contribution can be for 2024 is $4,700. So that's the difference between YAMPE and YMPE for 2024. Right.
And then when you're looking at this for your own stuff, when you see all the M's, it means you basically contributed the maximum, in this case, maximum YMPE and then maximum YAMPE. Yes. And then ultimately the additional portion. And so from that, it makes the math fairly easy. It's when you don't have the M's, that's when the number really actually shows your actual earnings for the year. And then we're talking about percentages of the maximum. And that's where you want to hire Jason to do the math for you, right?
Sure. Yeah. And in the calculator that I built, like I can see the percent of max for each of those individual years. Like I said, everything's granular. I see all the details, when I do this stuff. Those statements, that's your earnings history. Record of earnings is the CPP jargon term. Statement of contributions is, the common human speak.
But anyways, I just wanted to also share here a couple additional resources as mentioned. So Jason does this. I noticed on your website, you have your pricing right in your main page, doing the math for people. Relatively affordable if you wanted to get Jason to math it for you for what your CPP is. For individuals or spouses. And before that, though, I'd really recommend anyone go to his website. It's a great resource. I've got it linked on my resource page on my website for anything you want to know about CPP. Under the resources, there are some animated videos, which I'll tell the truth. I rely on that to figure out how the dropout provision works. Again, the ice cube tray and all that. So some really tremendous resources. And again, the slide rule with a video series explaining how to use it. And again, it might be for a lot of people a little bit complex trying to figure out at first glance. But if you really wanted to figure it out, there's the video series. I'm
gonna do some more example videos for the reference tool because I know that's lacking. Actually, it's funny. I'm surprised though. There are quite a number of people just from the general public that have tried it out and reached out to me and. At first I thought I'm stupid for creating a CPP slide rule, but it was it lets you get a lot of information all in one picture, and if once you know a little bit of the rules, like there are some really neat things you can do it that are beyond just the enhanced stuff. But I was surprised how many people have actually tried it out and kind of like it that are non-engineers apparently.
Yeah. Why? It's a lot of information. And obviously, with a lot more complications as it's sort of evolved over the years. I appreciate the fact that it's still one, and it's not the only, but it's supposed to be one of those kind of three key pillars, right? That we're supposed to have for our future retirement income. Whether, to Marcus's point, some people think of it as their all and only, one and only, or don't even think of it at all, right? Everybody, it's the one component I feel that everybody has it, right? However much they work, however much they earned, however long they worked for, there's a CPP component for them, right? Unlike the other two options, whether your personal savings or your work employment benefits, right? And so that spectrum, that muddy gray area that's in there now, it's really fascinating to see that how much more complex it is, but it's a critical part for everybody. So appreciate the color. That's really good.
It's even if your CPP is a small amount, like really small percentage of maximum. That's why I like coverage ratios. If it's part of that whole bucket planning. I don't know how much you believe in that, but it's good framing for a lot of people. Helps people stick to stuff. If you can show someone, your housing, even if that's all it covers, or these bills are covered for the rest of your life, probably for the rest of your life, as long as those expenses evolve per CPI inflation. Sorry, that's covered for the rest of your life. That's, even if it's a small amount, if you can say, hey, pick bills or expenses that are really important to someone, say, hey, this is what CPP is going to do for you. It's a nice, easy way for people to sort of, relate to. Because for a lot of people, it probably won't be a big proportion of what they need.
But it's non-zero. To your point, it's non-zero.
But it is non-zero, exactly.
Yep. Yeah. One thing you brought up earlier that I think actually is a little bit enlightening to me, and it really jives well with my experiences with a lot of clients. You talked about how CPP can help people spend. And, that's, again, the biggest challenge in retirement. I think Morgan Housel has a new book coming out soon, right, on how to spend in retirement. So I forget what the title is again, but it's like the biggest psychological barrier is spending in retirement. And especially when we think about retirement, for a lot of people, it's go-go years and then no-go years or slow-go years or whatever. Too many people, they regret not spending enough at early retirement when they could, because they have that psychological barrier. And if you have a good CPP income, it makes it easier. It makes it easier to spend your income, right? And you still have your savings, which you can use for lump sum purchases here and there. It's when people rely entirely on their savings in retirement, and when it's their monthly expenses are eating into that, even though they have more than enough, it's hard, right? It's hard mentally to see that pile of money go down a little bit each month.
It is, because there's so many unknowns. Typically people have a little bit of a portfolio. Well, that by itself is an unknown. It's it's volatile. It's changing every day. People really don't know how long they're going to live for. Big unknown, whether it's early or late. And so, well, what's the opposite of uncertainty? Well, it's a guarantee. You got this little piece, or your hand on a dial.
It's a little bit of a guarantee.
You can make that piece grow. You've got control over how much that's going to be, to some extent. It does. It alleviates that unknown, that uncertainty. We're starting to see those results in the research as well. And it changes too based on how old they are. And so, when you look at the responses from 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds, 80-year-olds, how much they value CPP and that guarantee and everything increases. Now, of course, you've got survivorship bias there. But I think, of course, there's going to be some people that don't get that die earlier or don't get as much from CPP. But for those people that do survive, the amount that they attribute, the number of good things that they attribute to having that guaranteed income is really powerful. And it's really starting to show up. And I like that if improving that information and improving people to spend in their younger retirement years, because drawing that connection, that's we want that too, right? We don't want people hoarding money and unless that's what they want to do, but not being able to have the freedom that they want, because of those uncertainties, and so that's where our job sort of comes in.
Yep. Yeah. I like to stress that as like being the most powerful thing in financial planning is one, giving people that confidence in retirement to spend, and two, showing them the alternatives. We can show you with our financial planning software the difference between starting your CPP at 60 and 65 or 70 or whatever age you want to choose, or making any type of decision. We talked about this in our last podcast. I don't know if you've had a chance to watch it yet, Jason, but it's out. And we talked about the inevitable decision that sometimes comes to parents when they get close to retirement, is maybe they have to pay some money for their kids' education, or maybe they want to give some money to their kids for a home down payment. Well, in a financial plan, we can see what happens if you take that chunk of money and out of the retirement plan and put it into something that's maybe near and dear to your heart at this time, giving some money to your kids. So again, that's really the power of financial planning.
You bring up a really good point, because a lot of people come to me with CPP questions and they want an answer to a financial planning question with only CPP information. And so, what I say is, a lot of people ask me, when should I start taking my CPP?
There's so
After
much more
I've
info.
only crunched their CPP numbers. I don't know anything about their other income sources, their portfolio, their tax situation.
Spend, yeah.
And so that's another sort of thing that I want people to really understand. I really want to stress this. So a CPP analysis, so the work that I do is not a financial plan. And it's really hard to pick a CPP start date, or for me to recommend one based on that information alone. So that's primarily the service I provide, is like, I'll crunch the numbers for you, show you your options. I can talk to you about those sorts of things, but without looking at everything holistically, that's not the best use. You're not going to get the best bang for your buck. That's not the best use for making that decision. And so looking at CPP standalone is something I try to discourage people to do, and I really want people to look at it more from a broader, holistic financial planning point of view. Now, you guys probably know, though, you've probably seen the surveys, how many Canadians have a financial plan? And then what's
that financial survey say, really? What does that even mean?
It's a pretty low number. Yeah.
Well, the survey might give a higher number than reality, because people don't know what a financial plan is, right?
Exactly. And so that's tough for people like me, because, if I can't if people aren't taking their CPP information and looking at it holistically, they're not getting the best. So the next best thing for me is help them to understand CPP, help them understand, the decisions that they have to make, simplify, those complicated things as much as possible. It's why I started making cartoons. In my articles, I try not to just write articles and have a bunch of math and stuff like that. I try to put in visuals and infographics and things like that, because I want people to, I understand the technical content, but go, hey, this is how things might affect me. I don't need to know, all those technical details, but I know that it's important. So I know to ask someone like my financial planner, and I get a little bit of a sense directionally, it should help me. Maybe it should help me, or maybe it won't help me, that kind of thing. But really, the best way to handle things is, your CPP numbers are an input to a financial plan. Look at everything, because that's, obviously that's where you're going to get the most, right? It's going to, and then have the most flexibility, right? Have the most maneuverability, room to maneuver, which is another thing. That freedom and maneuver has a value on its own as well, that I think people sort of underappreciate. Getting locked into one specific thing and not being able to make decisions on the fly, whether it's emergency funds, things like that. I like having flexibility and room and maneuver. People should know, I do have an option here. There is a decision to be made.
Yep.
I think it's going to be important. Maybe I should seek out some help.
Yeah.
All right. That's great. We'll be respectful of your time, Jason, and really appreciate you giving us an hour of your time to go over this. How can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more?
Simplest way is email, greetings@finepointsolutions.ca.
Okay.
All my CPP ideas and resources are on that website, and I announce new stuff on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn is where you're most active, eh?
That's right. Okay. That's the only social media I do. I don't really do anything else.
We'll put links. We'll put links to all of that in the blog post version of this, which will be at muhs.ca/JSM307. And yeah, that's where we'll leave it.
Awesome. It was a pleasure. It was awesome seeing you again, Justin. It's been
likewise, Jason.
Cool.
And Marcus too. Like, I don't know if people want to hear this, but Marcus and I met at a financial planning conference, and I think a lot of people would think that we would talk about markets and technical things and whatever. What I really appreciate about Marcus is we got into some really long, in-depth conversations about professionalism and ethics and consumer protection and the industry. And I don't get to have those kinds of deep conversations with people really often. So that was the most pleasurable thing about that conference. I went to is I found
that's
really
the
good professionals to get into some
the
really deep
IAFP
things
symposium.
you don't normally talk about. So
Yeah.
that's what stood out to me.
Any views discussed in this podcast are those of the presenters or any guests and not necessarily those of Canaccord Genuity Corp. Statements expressed herein are not intended to provide tax, legal, or financial advice, and under no circumstances should be construed as a solicitation to act as a securities broker or dealer in any jurisdiction. All views expressed are intended for general circulation only and do not have any regard to the specific investment objectives, financial circumstances, or general needs of any individual, organization, or institution. Investing in equities is not guaranteed, values change frequently, and past performance is not an indicator of future performance. Investors cannot invest directly in an index. Index returns do not reflect any fees, expenses, or sales charges. Please do not hesitate to contact us should you want to know more about anything discussed in this podcast. CG Wealth Management is a division of Canaccord Genuity Corp., member of the Canadian Investor Protection Fund and Canadian Investment Regulatory Organization.